The Lexus rolled over my front lawn at 6:12 in the morning and sank into the wet grass with a thick, ugly crunch. Linda Parker, one of our HOA board members, parked right beside my sprinkler heads like my yard was her private overflow lot. My grass folded under her tires, and muddy water pushed toward the sidewalk where 3 neighbors were already walking their dogs. She had just blocked the runoff path for half the cul-de-sac. What she did not know was that I controlled every irrigation zone, pressure valve, and timer box buried under that lawn. Then her passenger door opened. One heel stepped into the mud. The engine kept running. The smell of gasoline mixed with damp soil and fresh-cut grass. I stood behind my front window with coffee cooling in my hand, watching her adjust her sunglasses like nothing belonged to anyone but her. This was not the first time. It was the 5th time in 23 days. Same spot. Same front tire pressed into the same soft corner near the maple tree. Same tire tracks cutting across the only section of lawn I had spent all spring repairing. But this morning was different. This morning, her Lexus sat directly over Zone 3. That mattered. My name is Ryan Mitchell. I am 42 years old, and I run a small irrigation company outside Columbus, Ohio. I install sprinkler systems, repair broken water lines, and fix the kind of drainage mistakes homeowners only notice after a hard rain. My yard was not perfect because I was rich. It was perfect because I knew water. I knew pressure. I knew soil. And I knew exactly what happened when a heavy vehicle sat on saturated turf for too long. Linda did not care about any of that. She was already halfway up my walkway, tapping on her phone with one hand and holding a pink travel mug in the other. Her blonde hair was tucked under a visor with the HOA logo stitched across the front. The same logo printed on every warning letter she had sent me about approved mulch color, mailbox trim, and visible garden hoses. She looked at the ruts behind her car and did not even blink. I opened the front door before she could knock. Cold air slid past my shoulders. Somewhere behind her, water dripped from the crushed grass into the gutter. Tick, tick, tick. Ryan, she said, smiling without warmth. You really need to stop leaving your driveway empty if you do not want people using the open space. I looked past her at the Lexus. The rear tire had been a sprinkler head sideways. A small bead of water formed at the cracked seal. Then it vanished into the mud. She had damaged the system this time. Not just the grass. Not just the soil. The system. I stepped onto the porch. The boards were cold under my socks. That is my lawn, Linda. She glanced back like she was noticing it for the first time. It is community-facing frontage, she said. The HOA has broad discretion over appearance and access. That word stayed in the air. Access. She said it too easily. Too rehearsed. Across the street, Mr. Collins had stopped near his mailbox. Mrs. Avery watched from behind her kitchen curtains. Nobody came closer. Linda had that effect on people. She could turn a simple yard problem into paperwork before breakfast. Then she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a folded notice. The paper snapped open in the morning air. My name was already printed at the top. Unauthorized irrigation obstruction. I read the phrase once. Then again. My jaw tightened. She had parked on my lawn, crushed my sprinkler head, and somehow prepared a violation letter blaming my irrigation system. The coffee in my hand had gone completely cold. Linda smiled and held out the notice like she was handing me a receipt. Behind her, that cracked sprinkler head gave one quiet hiss. The timing was too perfect. The notice crackled in my hand as Linda walked back toward her Lexus. Morning sunlight reflected off the windshield and flashed across the wet grass. She moved without urgency, without doubt, like somebody following a script she had rehearsed 100 times before. The bent sprinkler head hissed again. A thin stream of water leaked into the muddy rut beneath her tire. That sound stayed with me. I watched her climb into the driver's seat and pull away. The lawn squished under the weight of the car one last time. More grass folded into the mud. More damage. The smell of damp earth lingered long after. She disappeared around the corner. I looked down at the violation notice. Unauthorized irrigation obstruction. The words felt ridiculous. My sprinkler system had been there for 6 years. The layout had not changed. The pressure settings had not changed. Nothing had changed except Linda's sudden interest in parking where she did not belong. A robin landed near the damaged area and hopped around the crushed grass. Then it flew away. Even the birds seemed to avoid that spot now. I crouched beside the broken sprinkler head. Mud soaked through one knee of my jeans. The plastic housing was cracked. Fresh tire tread marks surrounded it. Deep ones. I reached into my pocket and took a few photos. Then a few more. Evidence first. Always evidence first. Years of contractor work had taught me that. People forget conversations. Cameras do not. I stood and looked across the yard. The damage stretched farther than I expected. 2 parallel ruts cut across the lawn toward the curb. Water had already started collecting inside them. Another heavy rain would turn the entire area into a shallow channel. That mattered because the lawn was not only decorative. It was part of the drainage design. I had built the grading myself. Every slope, every sprinkler zone, every runoff path. The system worked because water moved exactly where it was supposed to move. Linda kept interrupting that. My phone buzzed. A text message from Mr. Collins across the street. One sentence. She parked there yesterday too. I stared at the message for a moment. Yesterday. I had been working a commercial repair job 20 miles away. I never saw it happen. Another message arrived before I could respond. This one included a photograph. Linda's Lexus sat in the exact same spot. Same angle. Same tire position. Same corner of the lawn. My jaw tightened. Then I opened the camera app and compared the picture to the damage in front of me. The tire tracks matched perfectly. A breeze moved through the maple tree overhead. Wet leaves rattled softly. Something about that repeated position bothered me. Most inconsiderate people park wherever it is convenient. Linda did not. She kept choosing the same location. The same sprinkler zone. The same section of grass. The same drainage path. I walked back to my garage and opened the irrigation control panel mounted on the wall. Rows of labeled switches sat behind the cover. Zone 1. Zone 2. Zone 3. Zone 4. Everything looked normal. Then I checked the activity logs. The display glowed blue in the dim light. My eyes moved across the timestamps. One entry immediately stood out. The system had activated unexpectedly 3 mornings earlier. Only for Zone 3. Only for 4 minutes. I leaned closer to the screen. That should not have happened. Then I noticed who had been standing near the controller that same day. The controller screen glowed softly in the garage while I stared at the timestamp. 3 mornings earlier. 6:11 a.m. Zone 3 activated for exactly 4 minutes. That was not part of the schedule. I scrolled through the logs again. Same result. The entry remained there. Bright and undeniable. Then I remembered who had been standing near the controller that day. Linda. The memory came back instantly. She had shown up with another HOA notice about visible utility equipment. She stood in the garage doorway while I loaded tools into my truck. At the time, I barely paid attention. Now the timing felt different. I walked over to the security monitor mounted beside the workbench. The smell of motor oil and damp grass lingered in the air. Outside, sunlight reflected off puddles in the damaged lawn. I pulled up footage from 3 days earlier. The video loaded slowly. Then the image appeared. There she was. White visor. Pink travel mug. Clipboard tucked under one arm. Linda stood near the open garage while I moved equipment toward my truck. Nothing unusual at first. Then a delivery driver stopped in front of the house. I stepped outside to sign for a package. The camera angle shifted slightly as I skipped forward. My pulse tightened. Linda remained in the garage alone for nearly 40 seconds. 40 seconds was not long, but it was enough. She glanced toward the driveway, then toward the controller, then back again. The footage was grainy. I could not see her hands clearly, but I could see her move closer. Very close. The video ended before proving anything. Still, the timing matched too well. A faint hiss came from outside, water leaking from the damaged sprinkler head. I walked back into the yard and followed the tire tracks again. Morning heat was beginning to lift moisture from the soil. The smell of wet earth hung in the air. A few blades of grass were already turning brown where the tires had compressed the roots. I crouched beside the deepest rut. Something caught my eye. A small piece of white plastic rested near the sprinkler housing. I picked it up carefully. It looked like part of a valve adjustment key, the kind technicians sometimes use when testing irrigation zones. I turned it over in my hand. One side was scratched. Freshly scratched. My phone buzzed. Another text from Mr. Collins. Check your mailbox. That was all it said. I headed toward the curb. The metal mailbox door squeaked open. Inside sat a folded envelope with no stamp. No name. Just plain white paper. I unfolded it slowly. A photograph slipped out. My stomach tightened. The picture showed Linda's Lexus parked on my lawn a week earlier. Not from the street. Not from a neighbor's porch. From above. Somebody had taken the photo from a second-story window or a drone. Red ink circled the exact area where she always parked. The exact area over Zone 3. Beneath the photograph, somebody had written 5 words. She always picks this spot. I looked back toward the damaged grass. Same tire marks. Same sprinkler line. Same section of drainage slope. A breeze moved across the yard. The maple leaves rattled overhead. Whoever sent the photo had noticed the pattern too. That meant I was no longer the only person watching. Then I flipped the photograph over and found something even more interesting. On the back of the photograph was a date and time written in black marker. April 17th, 6:13 a.m. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I checked the image metadata on my phone. Same morning, same minute. My eyes moved back to the tire tracks in the yard. That was the exact day Zone 3 had activated unexpectedly. A cool breeze crossed the lawn. The damaged sprinkler head gave another faint hiss. Water seeped into the soil and disappeared beneath the crushed grass. I folded the photograph and slipped it into my pocket. The morning suddenly felt much smaller, more focused. Somebody had documented the same pattern I was seeing. Somebody knew when it started. The question was why. I spent the next hour repairing the broken sprinkler head. The smell of fresh soil filled the air as I dug around the housing. Damp dirt collected under my fingernails. Birds chirped from the maple tree overhead. Everything looked normal from the street. Yet every few minutes my eyes drifted back to the tire ruts. They bothered me more now. Not because they damaged the lawn. Because they were predictable. Predictable people create predictable problems. Around noon, another HOA email arrived. My phone buzzed while I cleaned tools in the garage. The subject line read immediate compliance concern. I opened it. 3 photographs appeared. All showed my irrigation equipment. One focused on the controller. Another showed a valve box near the sidewalk. The third showed a sprinkler head near the curb. My jaw tightened. Somebody had been documenting my system. The message claimed excessive irrigation runoff posed a neighborhood concern. I read it twice. Then a third time. The accusation made no sense. My system had passed every inspection. The runoff in those photographs came directly from the tire ruts compressing the drainage slope. Linda knew that. Yet the email never mentioned the vehicle. Not once. A small detail near the bottom caught my eye. Inspection scheduled Friday. Friday was only 3 days away. Another escalation. Another deadline. Another attempt to make the irrigation system the problem instead of the damage. I printed the email and added it to a growing folder on my workbench. Photographs. Timestamps. Messages. Violation notices. The stack was getting thicker. Then I noticed something else. Every complaint referenced Zone 3. Not the front yard. Not the entire system. Only Zone 3. The same zone beneath Linda's favorite parking spot. I leaned against the workbench and looked toward the controller. The blue display glowed quietly. Then an idea began forming. Small at first. Nothing dramatic. Just an observation. I knew exactly how much water each zone delivered. I knew pressure levels, coverage patterns, timing windows. I knew how water behaved on healthy turf and compacted soil. More importantly, I knew Zone 3 better than anyone. The afternoon passed slowly. By evening, dark clouds gathered over the neighborhood. Wind pushed through the trees. Leaves skittered across the street. Around 7 o'clock, Mr. Collins knocked on my door. He stood on the porch holding a tablet. "You should see this," he said. The video he showed me came from his security camera. Grainy footage. Early morning. Linda's Lexus crossing my lawn again. Same angle. Same location. Same tire position. Then the footage revealed something new. After parking, Linda stepped out and looked directly at the sprinkler heads. She even walked around one of them before heading toward my house. Not accidental. Not careless. Deliberate. The video ended a few seconds later. Rain began tapping against the porch roof. Soft at first, then heavier. Mr. Collins looked toward the yard. She keeps choosing that spot for a reason. I watched water begin pooling inside the tire ruts again. The same ruts. The same section of grass. The same zone. Then I finally saw the pattern everyone else was missing. Rain continued falling through most of the night. By sunrise, the lawn looked worse than ever. Water filled the tire ruts like narrow trenches cutting across the grass. I stood near the front window with a mug of coffee and watched fog drift above the wet ground. The neighborhood was quiet. No engines. No lawn mowers. No barking dogs. Just the soft sound of water dripping from the maple tree. My eyes stayed on Zone 3. The pattern finally made sense. Linda was not randomly parking there. She was creating the exact conditions needed to support her complaints. The compressed soil trapped water. The trapped water created runoff. The runoff appeared in photographs. Then the photographs appeared in HOA emails. Cause and effect. Simple. Deliberate. A few minutes later, I walked outside carrying a measuring rod and notebook. Cold air stung my face. The grass soaked through my boots almost immediately. I documented everything. Depth of ruts. Water accumulation. Sprinkler locations. Drainage direction. Evidence first. Every measurement went into the notebook. Every photograph received a timestamp. Around 8 o'clock, another message arrived from the HOA. This time it came from the compliance committee. They wanted access to inspect the irrigation system before Friday's review. My jaw tightened. They were moving faster now. The pressure was increasing. I responded with a simple confirmation. Nothing more. Then I spent the rest of the morning reviewing controller logs. The blue screen glowed inside the garage while I compared activation records against security footage. One detail kept appearing. Every unusual irrigation event happened within 24 hours of Linda parking on the lawn. Not one exception. The pattern was so clean it almost looked planned. Then I noticed something else. Zone 3 never activated unexpectedly when I was home all day. Only when I was away working. Only when someone knew my schedule. That realization sat heavily in the room. The smell of damp cardboard and motor oil filled the garage. I stared at the controller for several seconds. Then I opened the settings menu and checked administrator access history. Most homeowners never use that feature. Contractors do. The system tracked every manual override, every adjustment, every change. My pulse quickened. 3 overrides appeared during the past month. I recognized 2 of them immediately. Both were mine. The third one was not. It occurred on the same morning shown in the anonymous photograph. 6:11 a.m. For minutes before the unusual activation, someone had manually triggered Zone 3. I leaned closer to the screen. The override came from the exterior access panel mounted beside the garage. Not remotely. Not automatically. Physically. Somebody had touched the system. A truck rumbled down the street outside. I barely noticed. My attention stayed on the display. Then a knock sounded at the garage door. Mr. Collins stood there holding another tablet. His expression looked serious. "You need to see this," he said. We stepped inside. The garage smelled of wet grass and fresh coffee. He opened a neighborhood social media page. Several residents were discussing recent HOA enforcement actions. Most complaints looked ordinary. Lawn height, trash bins, fence repairs. Then one post caught my attention. A resident mentioned receiving a warning after questioning Linda about parking near private property. Another resident replied with a photograph. My stomach tightened immediately. The image showed Linda's Lexus parked partly on somebody else's lawn 6 months earlier. Different house. Same angle. Same behavior. The comments underneath were even more interesting. Multiple neighbors described similar incidents. Short-term parking. Tire marks. Then complaints somehow targeting the homeowner instead. The pattern stretched beyond my property. Far beyond it. Mr. Collins looked at me and shook his head slowly. "Ryan, I do not think you are the first person she tried this on." I stared at the screen while rainwater dripped from the edge of the garage roof. Then I noticed a familiar name in the comment section. The familiar name in the comment section belonged to Susan Harper. I had not spoken to Susan in almost a year. She lived 3 streets over and served on the HOA landscaping committee before quietly resigning. The moment I saw her name, I sent a message. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Rainwater still dripped from the garage roof while I answered. Susan did not waste time. "You are talking about Linda, aren't you?" she asked. I looked toward the damaged lawn through the open garage door. "I am." A long pause followed. Then Susan sighed. I knew this would happen again. The sound of a passing truck faded in the distance. My grip tightened around the phone. Susan explained that several residents had complained about similar incidents over the past 2 years. Not identical. Never identical. The details changed. Sometimes it involved parking. Sometimes landscaping. Sometimes drainage. But the pattern stayed remarkably consistent. A homeowner questioned Linda. A problem suddenly appeared. Then HOA notices followed. "Most people gave up," Susan said quietly. "It was easier." Easier. That word stayed with me. I glanced at the stack of photographs and violation notices spread across my workbench. Linda counted on people choosing the easy path. She counted on frustration. She counted on silence. Susan lowered her voice. There is something else. Papers shuffled on her end. Several months ago, Linda pushed for authority over neighborhood maintenance reviews. My eyes narrowed. Including irrigation? Especially irrigation. The garage suddenly felt smaller. More pieces clicked together. The photographs, the inspections, the repeated focus on Zone 3. None of it happened by accident. After the call ended, I sat alone for several minutes. The controller display glowed softly nearby. Zone 3. Always Zone 3. The smell of wet grass drifted through the open garage. Then another realization surfaced. Linda's behavior depended on predictability. She always arrived at nearly the same time. She always parked in nearly the same place. She always created the same conditions. And she always assumed nobody was paying close attention. That assumption was becoming her biggest weakness. I walked over to the controller and opened the programming menu. Rows of settings appeared across the screen. Water pressure, cycle duration, activation windows, coverage zones. I knew every number by memory. Years of installation work had made that second nature. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. Water droplets sparkled across the damaged grass. The lawn looked wounded, but it also looked useful. A testing ground. A notebook sat beside the controller. I opened it and began writing. Dates, times, tire positions, activation logs, inspection schedules. The pattern became clearer with every line. Around 3 o'clock, another HOA email arrived. This one confirmed Friday's inspection. Linda would attend personally. I read the message twice. Then I noticed the scheduled arrival time. 6:15 a.m. My eyes moved immediately to the notes in front of me. 6:12, 6:13, 6:14. Nearly every documented parking incident occurred within that same window. The corner of my mouth twitched. For the first time all week, the situation looked less random and more manageable. Outside, the afternoon breeze pushed through the maple branches. Leaves rustled softly overhead. The damaged sprinkler head I repaired that morning clicked through a test cycle without issue. Perfect pressure, perfect coverage, perfect function, exactly as designed. Then I heard another notification. A camera alert. Movement detected in the front yard. I opened the live feed. Linda's Lexus was rolling slowly past my house again. She did not stop. Not this time. But she looked directly at the lawn as she passed. Then she smiled. That smile told me she believed Friday would go exactly the way she planned. I started a new page in the notebook and wrote down one simple question. What happens if the timing works both ways? Friday arrived cold and clear. The storm clouds were gone. The grass still held moisture from earlier rain, and a thin layer of dew shimmered across the lawn beneath the first light of dawn. I was already awake. Coffee steamed beside the controller panel in the garage. The clock read 6 o'clock. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I checked the cameras one more time. Front yard, driveway, sidewalk, all recording normally. The repaired sprinkler head sat exactly where it belonged. Zone 3 showed perfect pressure during the previous evening's test cycle. I closed the controller cover and looked at the notebook on my workbench. Dates, times, tire tracks, inspection notices, override logs. Every page told the same story. Linda relied on routine. And routine was predictable. Outside, a bird landed near the maple tree and pecked at the grass. The neighborhood slowly began waking up. Porch lights switched off one by one. A garage door opened somewhere down the block. Then my phone vibrated. Camera alert. Movement detected. I opened the feed immediately. A familiar white Lexus turned onto my street. My eyes moved to the clock. 6:12. Exactly. The vehicle rolled slowly toward my property. Then it happened again. The Lexus left the pavement and crossed onto the lawn. Same angle, same speed, same section of grass. The front tires settled directly over Zone 3. My jaw tightened. Some people never learn because nothing ever forces them. 2. Linda stepped out carrying her clipboard. She wore the same visor, the same smile, the same confidence. The lawn squished beneath her shoes as she walked toward the sidewalk. A second vehicle appeared behind her. Then another. The inspection team. Right on schedule. 2 HOA committee members climbed out carrying folders. A third person carried a tablet. They gathered near the curb and began speaking with Linda. I watched from inside the garage. Nobody noticed me yet. Nobody noticed the cameras either. The morning air smelled of wet grass and fresh mulch. A light breeze moved through the maple leaves overhead. Everything looked calm, professional. Organized. That was exactly how Linda liked it. Then she pointed toward the tire ruts. The committee members nodded while taking notes. One of them photographed the standing water. Another photographed the sprinkler heads. They were documenting the result, not the cause. Just as Susan described. The pattern repeated itself perfectly. I took a slow sip of coffee. Then I checked the clock again. 6:14. 1 minute remained before the inspection officially began. The controller sat silent beside me. The blue display glowed softly in the dim garage. Zone 3 was scheduled for a standard automated test cycle at 6:15. Completely legal. Completely documented. Completely normal. The same schedule it had followed for months. I had not changed it. I had not modified it. I had not hidden it. Everything was exactly where it belonged. Outside, Linda moved closer to the damaged section of grass. She stood directly beside the front passenger door of her Lexus while explaining something to the committee. One member looked skeptical. Another continued taking photographs. The sound of distant traffic drifted across the neighborhood. Then the controller clicked. A small sound, barely noticeable, but I heard it. The irrigation valve opened beneath the ground. Water pressure surged through the lines. The sprinkler heads rose from the soil one after another. Pop, 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 perfect timing. Perfect pressure. Perfect coverage. I watched through the garage window as the first streams of water arced across the morning sunlight. Linda turned toward the sound. Her expression changed instantly, and the inspection team saw everything. The water crossed the lawn in bright silver arcs and caught the morning sunlight like glass. Every sprinkler head in Zone 3 operated exactly as designed. The steady hiss filled the air. Linda froze beside the passenger door of her Lexus. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the first spray reached the side of the vehicle. Water splashed across the doors, the windows, and the front tire buried in the soft grass. One of the committee members lowered his camera and looked at the lawn. Then he looked at the car. Then back at the lawn again. The sequence mattered. Cause before effect. For the first time all morning, they were seeing both. Linda stepped away from the spray and pointed toward the sprinkler heads. Her mouth moved quickly. Too quickly. The committee members remained where they were. One of them crouched near the tire rut. Another walked toward the curb to study the runoff path. I stayed inside the garage and watched through the open door. The smell of wet grass drifted through the cool morning air. Water collected inside the compressed tracks exactly as it always did. Nothing unusual. Nothing manipulated. Just physics. The same physics Linda had been using against me for weeks. One committee member opened a folder and compared something against the photographs they had brought. Another pointed directly at the Lexus. The conversation immediately changed direction. I could see it in their faces. They were no longer discussing irrigation equipment. They were discussing the vehicle sitting on top of the damaged area. Linda crossed her arms, then uncrossed them, then pointed toward the sprinkler heads again. Nobody followed her gesture this time. The morning sun climbed higher above the maple tree. Droplets sparkled across the lawn. The repaired sprinkler head rotated smoothly through its programmed cycle. Perfect coverage. Perfect pressure. Exactly what the inspection was supposed to verify. My phone vibrated. A camera notification. I opened the feed from the opposite angle. The footage captured everything. The arrival time. The parking position. The activation cycle. Every second. I saved the clip immediately. Evidence first. Always evidence first. Outside, one committee member finally approached my garage. He introduced himself and asked if the irrigation schedule could be reviewed. I handed him printed records. Daily activation times. Maintenance logs. Service history. Everything organized in a binder. He flipped through the pages while standing beneath the garage light. The sprinkler system continued running behind him. Page after page told the same story. The schedule had existed long before the complaints. Long before the inspections. Long before the violation notices. His expression changed slightly as he read. Then he asked a question I had been waiting to hear. Has this schedule been modified recently? No, I answered. The logs show every change. He checked the records again, then nodded. Another committee member joined us carrying a tablet. They compared timestamps. They compared photographs. They compared notes. Linda remained near the curb. The confidence she carried earlier had started to fade. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. A small shift. A crack in the routine. Then something unexpected happened. Mr. Collins stepped out of his house holding his own tablet. Across the street, Mrs. Avery came outside as well. Another neighbor appeared near the corner mailbox. People had noticed the inspection. More importantly, people had noticed the car sitting on my lawn. Quiet conversations began spreading along the sidewalk. The committee members noticed too. One of them accepted a copy of the security footage from Mr. Collins. Another asked where the recording was taken. The answer pointed directly toward his front porch camera. Independent evidence. Not mine. Not theirs. Neutral. Linda's posture stiffened immediately. The sprinkler cycle finally ended. The heads retracted into the grass. Silence settled across the yard. Water dripped from the Lexus doors onto the crushed turf below. One committee member looked at the vehicle, then at the tire ruts, then at Linda, and that was when she made a mistake. The mistake happened so fast that I almost missed it. One committee member asked a simple question. How often do you park here? Linda answered before anyone else could speak. Only when necessary. The words hung in the air for a second. Then Mr. Collins cleared his throat. He held up his tablet. That is not what my camera shows. Silence followed. The neighborhood suddenly felt very still. Water continued dripping from the side of the Lexus. Tap, tap, tap. One committee member turned toward Mr. Collins. Another looked at Linda. The third opened a note on the tablet and began typing. Linda adjusted her visor and crossed her arms again. One camera does not prove anything, she said. The confidence was still there, but thinner now. Less natural. Mr. Collins nodded calmly. That is true. Then he swiped to another video. Different date. Same lawn. Same vehicle. Same position. A few neighbors exchanged looks. The committee members moved closer to the screen. The footage played for less than 30 seconds. It was enough. The front tire stopped directly over Zone 3. Exactly where it sat today. The video ended. Another began. Different week. Same result. Linda's expression tightened. A light breeze moved across the wet grass. The maple leaves rustled overhead. Nobody seemed interested in the sprinkler heads anymore. The focus had shifted. Cause before effect. Vehicle before runoff. Pattern before complaint. One of the committee members finally looked at me. Do you have records showing when the complaint started? I nodded and walked into the garage. The binder sat exactly where I left it. Maintenance logs. Violation notices. Photographs. Inspection requests. I carried it outside and placed it on the hood of my truck. The metal felt cool beneath my hands. Pages flipped in the breeze while the committee reviewed them. Every complaint appeared after a parking incident. Every photograph showed damage following vehicle traffic. Every timeline pointed in the same direction. Then one member stopped turning pages. His finger rested on a printed controller log. What is this? He asked. My pulse quickened. The override entry. The same one I discovered earlier. 6:11 a.m. manual activation request. Zone 3. I explained how the controller tracked changes, how overrides worked, how the system recorded physical access. The committee member read the log twice. Then he compared it against the date written on the anonymous photograph. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Linda immediately stepped forward. That does not prove anything. The response came too quickly, too defensively. Another committee member glanced toward her, then toward the log again. A small crack became a larger one. The morning sun continued climbing higher. The wet grass began drying at the edges. More neighbors gathered near the sidewalk. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. They simply watched. Some carried coffee mugs. Others stood with folded arms. A few quietly exchanged stories of their own. I could hear fragments. Parking complaints. Landscaping disputes. Warning letters. Similar experiences. The atmosphere felt different now. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just honest. People were finally comparing notes. Then Susan Harper arrived. She stepped out of her car carrying a folder thick with papers. My stomach tightened immediately. I knew what was inside. She walked straight toward the committee members and handed over the folder without saying much. Resignation notes. Meeting records. Landscaping committee communications. Documentation. Lots of it. One committee member opened the folder. Another joined him. Their expressions changed page by page. Linda noticed it too. She looked toward Susan, then away. The confidence from earlier was almost gone now. Clouds drifted slowly across the bright morning sky. The neighborhood remained unusually quiet. Then one committee member closed the folder and asked a question nobody expected. Why were irrigation complaints being reviewed through your office directly? Linda blinked. Just once. But everyone saw it. And for the first time all morning, she did not have an answer ready. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The question hung over the group like a storm cloud that refused to move. Linda shifted her weight and glanced toward the sidewalk. The committee members waited. Susan stood quietly beside her car with her arms folded. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Then silence returned. Finally, Linda cleared her throat. The board delegated certain review responsibilities to improve efficiency. Her answer sounded polished, rehearsed. One committee member opened Susan's folder again. Pages rustled in the morning breeze. He stopped at a highlighted section and read silently. Another committee member leaned over his shoulder. Their expressions changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of reaction people have when they discover something they were not expecting to find. The smell of wet grass still lingered across the yard. Water droplets clung to the tire ruts. The Lexus remained parked exactly where it had created the problem. Nobody seemed eager to move it now. One committee member looked up from the paperwork. According to these records, irrigation complaints were supposed to be reviewed by a rotating committee. Linda said nothing. The committee member tapped the page. Yet nearly every complaint was routed through a single office. Another pause followed. Across the street, more neighbors had gathered. Nobody interrupted. They simply listened. The atmosphere felt less like an inspection and more like a fact-finding meeting. People were watching a story unfold in real time. The committee members continued comparing documents. Susan supplied additional emails. Mr. Collins shared more footage. I handed over printed maintenance reports and service logs. Piece by piece, the timeline became impossible to ignore. Every unusual complaint followed the same sequence. A property issue appeared. Documentation emerged quickly. Then enforcement followed. Several residents quietly confirmed similar experiences. The pattern stretched farther than anyone realized. Linda attempted to redirect the conversation toward landscaping standards, then toward water management, then toward neighborhood appearance. Each effort faded within minutes because the evidence kept pointing back to the same question. Why were the reviews concentrated under one person? The morning sun climbed higher. The damp grass began drying along the edges of the lawn. A light wind carried the scent of fresh mulch from a nearby flower bed. One committee member finally walked over to inspect the controller logs more carefully. He studied the override entry for several minutes. Then he asked whether physical access was required. Yes, I answered. Someone has to stand at the exterior panel. He nodded slowly. Another note went into the tablet. Linda's expression tightened again. The confidence she carried at sunrise had almost completely disappeared. It was being replaced by something else. Calculation. She seemed to be measuring every response before speaking. The problem was that the documents were now speaking louder than she was. Then Susan opened a separate folder. This one was thinner, more organized. Inside were meeting summaries from the landscaping committee. She handed them directly to the inspection team. One member flipped through the pages while standing near the curb. Halfway through, he stopped. His eyes narrowed. Then he reread the paragraph. Interesting, he said quietly. The word immediately caught everyone's attention. He turned the document around so the others could see it. The page referenced concerns about recurring vehicle-related lawn damage months earlier. Several homeowners had reported it. Recommendations had been submitted. Follow-up reviews were requested. Yet nothing happened. The reports simply disappeared from the process. Susan pointed to the signature section. No final review. No committee response. No resolution. Just silence. The committee members exchanged looks. Another piece clicked into place. The neighborhood remained unusually still. Even the casual conversations had faded. People sensed something important was happening. Then one committee member stood up straight and closed the folder. He looked directly at Linda. We are suspending this inspection review pending a full audit of the complaint process. A murmur moved through the crowd. Linda's face remained composed, but only barely. The inspection she expected to control had just turned into something much larger. Then another neighbor stepped forward carrying a folder of his own. The neighbor carrying the folder was named David Reynolds. He lived near the entrance of the subdivision and rarely attended HOA meetings. That was why everyone paid attention. When he stepped forward, quiet people usually have a reason for speaking. The folder in his hands looked worn from years of storage. He handed it directly to the committee members without saying much. I think these belong in the review too, he said. One committee member opened the folder while standing beside the curb. The pages inside were older than the documents already on the table. Some were printed emails. Others were complaint forms. Several contained photographs. The committee members began turning pages. Their pace slowed almost immediately. David folded his arms and looked toward the lawn. The Lexus still sat in the same place. Water droplets glistened on the doors. Tire tracks remained visible beneath it. Nothing about the scene had changed except the direction of the conversation. The smell of drying grass drifted through the air. A lawn mower started somewhere in the distance, then faded away. The committee member holding David's folder stopped on a photograph and showed it to the others. Even from several feet away, I recognized what they were looking at. Another vehicle. Another damaged lawn. Another complaint sequence. Different homeowner. Same pattern. The date on the page was nearly 18 months old. My stomach tightened. This stretched back farther than any of us realized. David finally spoke again. I challenged a landscaping citation. 2 weeks later, my front yard became a problem. He shrugged. At least according to the reports. Several neighbors exchanged looks. The statement sounded familiar because many of them had lived through similar situations. One by one, people began contributing small details. Not dramatic accusations, just observations, timelines, notices, inspection requests, pieces of information that never seemed important until they were placed beside each other. The committee members listened carefully. They took notes. They asked questions. Most importantly, they stopped assuming the complaints existed in isolation. The morning continued warming. Sunlight reflected off windows across the street. Children rode bicycles near the corner before being called back home. Life moved on around us, but the gathering in front of my house remained focused. Then one committee member looked directly at me. "Ryan, do you still have the controller records showing the override?" I handed him another printed copy. The pages felt slightly damp from the humidity. He compared the timestamp against several documents from the folder. Then he highlighted something on his tablet. Another committee member leaned closer. A third joined them. Quiet discussion followed. Linda stood alone near the sidewalk now. Nobody was asking for her input anymore. That shift seemed to bother her more than anything else. For weeks, maybe longer, she had controlled the conversation. Now the documents controlled it. Then Susan stepped forward again. She removed a single envelope from her folder and handed it to the committee. "This was never reviewed," she said. The envelope contained a formal recommendation from the landscaping committee. It requested oversight changes regarding complaint handling and inspection authority. The date stunned everyone. The recommendation had been submitted almost a year earlier. Yet nobody on the current review team remembered seeing it. One committee member flipped through the attached signatures. Another checked meeting records on the tablet. The recommendation had vanished from the process completely. A breeze swept across the neighborhood. Loose pages fluttered on the hood of my truck. Someone placed a paperweight on top before they could blow away. Small gestures like that kept happening. Neighbors helping, sharing records, comparing notes. The atmosphere no longer felt divided. It felt collaborative. Then a notification sounded from one committee member's tablet. He opened it immediately. His eyes narrowed as he read. Another member looked over his shoulder. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, the first committee member looked up. The board president authorized several complaint escalations without committee review. The statement landed heavily. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody needed to. The documents were doing all the talking. Linda opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. For the second time that morning, she had no immediate answer. The committee members gathered their folders and exchanged a series of quiet comments. Whatever they were discussing now seemed larger than my lawn, larger than the inspection, and larger than a single complaint. Then one of them made a phone call. The phone call lasted less than 2 minutes, but it changed the atmosphere immediately. The committee member stepped away from the group while speaking in a low voice. Everyone else remained near the curb. Nobody seemed eager to leave. The folders stayed open. The evidence stayed spread across the hood of my truck. A light breeze moved through the neighborhood. The smell of warm grass replaced the damp scent from earlier. Linda stood beside the sidewalk with her arms folded tightly. She looked toward the committee several times, but nobody approached her. That alone said a lot. The call ended. The committee member returned and quietly shared information with the others. They listened without interrupting. One of them nodded. Another made additional notes on a tablet. Then they began organizing the documents into separate stacks. Complaint records, maintenance logs, meeting summaries, video evidence, controller reports. The process looked methodical, professional. For the first time all morning, everything seemed to be moving according to a clear procedure. Susan watched from beside her car. Mr. Collins remained near the sidewalk with his tablet under one arm. David stood quietly near the mailbox. The neighbors who had gathered earlier were still there. Not because they wanted drama, because they wanted answers. For years, most of them had only seen pieces of the puzzle. Now those pieces were finally sitting together in one place. One committee member approached me and asked for copies of the controller logs. Another requested the security footage. I handed everything over. Evidence first. The same rule that guided me from the beginning was now guiding the review. The morning sun reflected off the truck hood while the documents changed hands. Then a committee member opened the folder containing the landscaping committee recommendations. He reread several pages before looking up. These should have triggered a formal review months ago. Nobody argued. Nobody could. The paperwork spoke for itself. Linda finally stepped forward. Her voice remained controlled. There are explanations for those decisions. The statement sounded familiar, like something she had used many times before. One committee member nodded politely. That may be true. He tapped the folder. That is why the audit will review everything. The word audit settled heavily over the group. Even the neighbors reacted to it. Small glances, quiet whispers, nothing dramatic. Just recognition that the situation had moved beyond a single property dispute. The lawn was no longer the story. The process was. A squirrel darted across the street. Somewhere in the distance, a delivery truck backed into a driveway. Ordinary neighborhood sounds continued around us. Yet the gathering remained focused. Then another notification appeared on one of the tablets. Additional board records had arrived electronically. The committee members reviewed them together. Their expressions became more serious with each page. One timeline compared complaint approvals against meeting schedules. Another showed authorization chains. A third highlighted review exceptions. The pattern was difficult to ignore. The same names appeared repeatedly. The same decisions bypassed normal review. The same categories received unusual attention. Irrigation, landscaping, property appearance. The very issues connected to many of the complaints residents had discussed that morning. Linda looked away toward her vehicle. Water spots still covered the side panels. The tire tracks remained visible beneath it. A committee member glanced at the Lexus and then at the photographs collected throughout the review. Cause before effect. Vehicle before complaint. The sequence remained consistent. Then the committee chairman finally closed his folder. The sound was sharp in the quiet air. Everyone looked toward him. He thanked the residents who had provided records. He thanked Susan. He thanked Mr. Collins. Then he announced that all active enforcement actions connected to the irrigation review would be suspended pending the audit results. A wave of relief moved through the crowd. Not celebration. Relief. There is a difference. People were not excited because someone was losing influence. They were relieved because somebody was finally examining the facts. Linda said nothing. The committee members began packing their materials. The review was ending, but the larger investigation was only beginning. As neighbors slowly started returning home, one committee member stopped beside me and lowered his voice. Ryan, there is one record we still have not located. He glanced toward the folders before looking back at me, and it may explain everything. The committee member's words stayed with me long after everyone left. The missing record, the one document they could not locate. By noon, the neighborhood had returned to normal. Cars moved through the streets. Lawns were being mowed. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. Yet nothing felt quite the same. The tire ruts remained in my yard. The sprinkler system remained intact. But the balance of the situation had shifted. For the first time since this started, the burden was no longer on me to prove something was wrong. The review team was asking its own questions now. 3 days later, the call finally came. I was repairing a commercial irrigation line across town when my phone vibrated. The committee chairman's name appeared on the screen. I stepped away from the work site and answered. The missing record had been found. It was buried inside an archived board file that had never been transferred into the normal review system. The document showed that concerns about complaint handling had been formally raised more than a year earlier. The recommendations were never processed. The review was never completed. Several oversight steps had simply stopped. The chairman spoke calmly, professionally, but I could hear the significance in his voice. The audit was finished. Additional procedural changes were already being prepared. When I returned home that evening, the neighborhood looked different. Not physically, emotionally. People waved more often. Conversations lasted longer. A few neighbors stopped by to ask how the lawn was recovering. Others shared stories about their own experiences. The uncertainty that had lingered over the community seemed to be fading. Over the following weeks, the damaged section of grass slowly returned. Fresh green growth replaced the muddy patches. The sprinkler system ran exactly as it always had. Every morning, the heads rose from the soil with the same steady rhythm. Water flowed where it was supposed to flow. The drainage path worked exactly as designed. Nothing needed a trap anymore. The truth had done the work. One afternoon, I noticed a familiar vehicle approaching from down the street. The white Lexus slowed as it reached my property. Then it continued driving. No tires crossed the grass. No wheels touched the lawn. It stayed exactly where it belonged. I watched from the porch while the vehicle disappeared around the corner. The moment felt strangely quiet. Not dramatic. Not triumphant. Just finished. A few days later, the HOA distributed a notice outlining new review procedures and additional oversight requirements. Complaint handling would involve multiple reviewers. Documentation standards would be expanded. Maintenance concerns would follow transparent review channels. The language was formal, dry, administrative. Yet every resident understood what it meant. Systems work best when nobody controls them alone. On a cool Saturday morning, I stood near the maple tree holding a cup of coffee. Dew sparkled across the grass. Birds moved between the branches overhead. The same sprinkler head that had once been cracked beneath a tire rotated smoothly through its cycle. Water drifted across the lawn in perfect arcs. I looked toward the curb where the deepest rut used to be. It was almost invisible now. Nature had done its part. Time had done its part. And evidence had done its part. Mr. Collins waved from across the street. Susan smiled while walking her dog past the house. Life moved forward. The lawn remained green. The controller remained programmed. The records remained filed away in the garage. I kept them all. Not because I expected another fight. Because they reminded me of something simple. Facts are patient. They do not rush. They do not argue. They simply wait until somebody is willing to look. The sprinkler heads lowered into the ground as the cycle ended. The yard fell quiet again. This time it stayed that way.